In FPL, they provide us with a TSB value for each player, which stands for Teams Selected By. Unfortunately, it does not mean the sexy bacon. But actually, this value is very important. Players that are less owned are just built different, man. And different in FPL is good. Low owned being known as differential players. If you own a player that no one in the entire game also owns, then he goes and scores 2 goals, gets all the bonus, and nets you 15 points. That's 15 points that no one else is going to get. Meaning it can push up your overall rank much higher compared to a player that a lot of people had. But remember, this could go the other way, where if you don't own a player that is very high owned, and he goes and scores a lot, then that's a lot of people getting a gain which you aren't getting. Which is what I like to call unlucky! So today, I bring to you a draft, a maverick team of players that are so low owned, only 1% of current managers have them in their teams. Disclaimer, players' ownership varies as much as Pogba's haircut, and these numbers could be way outdated but are accurate at the time of recording. Before I start though, it is also worth mentioning that sometimes a player is selected less by managers for a reason. That reason could be their place in their team is up for debate, the fixture's just looking really bad, or maybe no one's heard of the geezer. So if you are to have a browse or have a swing at any of these players, make sure they are actually playing first. Yeah, sounds good. But today, lads, I am going to spoil you. It must be golden time because today I'm not just going to slap you a starting 11, but I'm going to give you a full set of 15 unwanted men that could be very good this season. Starting with a mispronunciation, and excuse my French, but it's Meslier. He is a young keeper that still has got some competition for his spot, but after Casilla kind of did something very bad, it should be Meslier's spot to keep. He played 10 games for Leeds last season, keeping a very impressive 7 clean sheets. Get this guy working in a laundrette rather than in goals, with sheet cleaning rates that high, but he's currently only selected by 1.3% of managers, also being at the minimum starting keeper price. Leeds do have some nasty, vicious fixtures, but we could see them being the Sheffield United of clean sheets like last season, where they could do very well against the tougher teams. Is Meslier being slept on, lads? He could be a very good option, but for me, he's a wait and see. Definitely not touching him yet. With the next keeper being, wait for it, Kepa Arrizabalaga. Now, you're probably thinking, yes, he's definitely chucked in the bin at only 1.8% selected for a good reason. 5 million for a keeper in that properly wibbly-wobbly Chelsea defence. But that is now a Chelsea defence with a very experienced Thiago Silva in it, who is just so good, he even had a song made for him. Wow, fair play. But they've also got Ben Chilwell. Also, hopefully, some of their younger defenders have used their experiences from last season to not defend like absolute wet wipes this season. So you would imagine that Chelsea's defence should be somewhat better. I mean, just like my taste when I'm drunk, the standards are not very high, but I don't think he's the worst option in the world. Still not the best, but could be good. Maybe. Moving on to the defence, where with some of these, we are really going to have to be like Elastigirl and stretch really far to see why some of them could be a good option. Because most of them aren't. But starting with the Welsh wizard himself, Benjamin Davies. Currently selected by only 1.9% of managers, where last season he was one of the main puzzle pieces to the way Mourinho wanted to play. He played almost every game under the big bus man himself, especially at the latter half of the season. And he is also a fullback, so you could say there's some attacking potential there, for a good enough value at 5 million. But now the sad news. The way Mourinho played last season meant that even as a fullback, he couldn't attack, but had to stay back to make sure that bus was still intact. Now, there is a possibility that Spurs could switch to a back 5 with wing-backs, where if Davis was the one selected for the left wing-back role, he could turn into a very sexy option. But if that were to happen, he would probably be sharing those minutes with Ryan Sing-a-Song. So it's probably a maybe wait and see how Spurs set up first, and see how they play before we can see if he's a good option. Moving on to a prospect so good in the Championship playoff final, every FPL geezer and grandmother was really excited, licking their own lips at the possibility of owning him at a very cheap price. But then FPL decided to grab him by the scruff and choke slam him down into no one's team, pricing him at 5 million. It's Fulham's Joe Bryan. Now, of course, he had to go and score more goals in the playoff final when everyone's watching than he did in the entire rest of the championship before that. But now he's the most expensive Fulham defender, who are probably going to have one of the worst defensive records out of any team this season. But they do have a great opening run of fixtures, so you never know, he could get something. Only 1.8% of current managers currently agree though, so probably not. Moving on to another Spursy player, the double D's are out. It's Eric Dyer. Now, a centre-back at a team that only kept 8 clean sheets all season last season, at 5 million, doesn't sound great, but half of those clean sheets actually came after the restart in their final 9 games, whilst now Dyer being a teacher's pet to Mourinho, being sponsored by London Hammers as he is one of the most nailed-on players in that team. He's also a ball-playing centre-back that could have a helping hand in some assists, with sometimes a bit of a goal potential too. I think he's actually one of the most underrated options right now, especially with their great run of fixtures, but you never know what you're going to get from a Spursy Bottle FC. 1.3% selected Dyer makes his team. Moving on to another not highly selected player that we can target. It's Matt Target. Now, I know he's a blanker in the first week, Villa not playing straight away, which is probably the main reason he is only 1.5% selected. Also with a bad fixture run after that. Also, Villa being one of the favourites to get relegated. Yeah, it doesn't sound too good, does it? But actually, their defence was a lot better after the restart, where he can also get some assists too. So he's not the worst option at 4.5 million, but the blank at the start is enough for people to spin his jaw and not select him in their teams right now. With the final defender, who could be a really good option if he gets selected for his team, it's Sheffield United's Jack Robinson. Now, I believe he's not quite first choice, but if he isn't, he's definitely not too far off on those fringes and could get some games here and there. He's played all the pre-season games for Sheffield United instead of Jack O'Connell, where maybe we can see Robinson robbing some game time. And he's also the cheapest priced Sheffield United defender at only 4.5 million, and also only selected by 0.2% of FPL teams. If he plays, could be very good. And that is the defence line filled in. Now, I do want to mention though, with defenders being differential picks, it's not as differential as it seems usually. If you have, let's say, Dyer at 1% selected, and Spurs get a clean sheet, that probably means all of their other defenders got a clean sheet too, where the likes of Doherty now at Spurs is currently selected by over 20% of managers, where suddenly a bit more than that 1% are getting those clean sheet points. So with differential defenders, they're either going to have to get some bonus or attacking returns that the other options in their team won't get to actually be different. So usually it isn't quite worth the risk of trying to be too clever unless those options are cheaper and you could put that money elsewhere. Moving on to the midfield, where actually we have some very tasty options. Starting with another Spursy player. Geez, do that many people despise Mourinho? Unlucky lad. But it's potentially one of his other first picks, one of his very own golden boys, in Dele Alli. Now, we have seen a slight decline in Dele's returns over the last few years, but he has been streaming Warzone on Twitch, so he deserves some respect, right? But actually, when Mourinho first came in, Dele was the man getting all the points for Spursy, until he got deck chaired and then was out for a few months injured. So maybe, at not only a cheaper price, but currently only selected by 1.9% of managers, he could be a real golden ticket to some of those secret points straight into your team. I would not be surprised in the slightest if he was one of the first big bandwagons of the season. So maybe keep a close eye, maybe even 2 eyes, on the Dele man himself. Moving on to the real forgotten man, one of the players of the season in a title-winning team only 2 seasons ago. It's Mr. Banana Silva. Now, there's always that question over minutes and who plays and who starts for the Manchester of Cities. But now, with David Silva gone, we could see him get more and more minutes than ever before. Where maybe it could be between him and Foden, who takes that second attacking mid-role next to a certain ginger lad who's quite good. Kevin De Bruyne! He's actually been quite consistent since arriving, getting at least 11 returns in each of his last 3 seasons, where again, with maybe more minutes, could have one of the best seasons he's ever had. His price comes in at 7.5 million, only currently selected by 1.8% of managers, where I myself wouldn't want to risk him straight at the start, but he could become a really great cheap way to get into that Man City attack later on down the road. Next to him in our just built different team, it's an absolute dribbler. No, he's actually really good on the ball. It's Jared Bowen. Rotation risk? Maybe. Fixtures on his side? Absolutely not. But he is a very good player who I imagine will be one of those players that could get something out of any game. Also, not at the worst price, being at 6.5 million. After West Ham's bad fixture run, after they get absolutely West Hammered themselves a few times, in their nicer run, I can see slightly more than 0.9% of managers having him in their teams. But for now, it is definitely a hold up, wait a minute, probably wait another minute until we see how they do. Next up, being a guy so good, he was hyped up to be the new Belgium Eden Hazard of the Premier League last season. Then he only played 2,000 minutes and everyone forgot about him. It's Brighton's Leandro Trossard. Now, it is no doubt that he is a very good player, and even without too much game time last season, he still managed 5 goals and 5 assists. I'm expecting a lot more from him this season. He's one of the most attacking 6 million midfielder options in the game, currently blocked out and ignored by most, being selected by only 0.5% of managers. Brighton could be the real dark horse of the season this season, where he could be one of the main men to help them do it. Finishing the midfield with an absolute baller, it's Matt Ritchie. More like Matt Cheapy at only 5 million this year. Also only selected by 0.8% of managers. But probably because he's an FPL midfielder who could potentially play some games in defence, albeit at wing back, but it's the reverse out of position we don't like to see. But the reason he is in, because he can also play on the wing, well, when he plays a lot, he actually has a pretty good assist record, whilst also usually being the main penalty kick taker when he's on the field. Now, I wouldn't have him in my team, but if he plays for Newcastle in their good run of opening fixtures, we could see him picking up some points off the ground, delivering it into about 7 people's pockets. And that is the midfield done. There are some really good options here, maybe not initially, and maybe we need to see most of them play a bit more as well, but already it shows that sometimes people miss some pretty good options, where yeah, there are better options, but I'll explain why differentials can be good after we finish the forwards. Starting the forwards with Sebastian Haller. Now yeah, we didn't quite see the Haller West Ham sign last season, even though he had a pretty good start, whereas some FPL managers had him in. I was one of them, with he. But he's had a very good pre-season, whilst also Antonio picking up a little bit of a knock, so could we see Haller start for them? I think the fact Antonio was in such good form at the end of the season might actually push Haller to fight for that spot even more. Where I think we probably should block and ignore them at the start of the season, especially in their bad fixtures. But soon after, there might be a clear starter between the two, who could also be at a nice price. More of a wait and see here though, I think, with 0.8% of managers currently selecting Sebastian. With next to him, someone I was actually really surprised of how unwanted he is, being potentially a starter for a top 6 team at only 6 million, and only being chosen by 1.3% of people. Get the phone out because it is agent Eddie Nketiah. Now yeah, he's not quite an amazing goal scorer, undroppable finisher yet, but if Aubameyang stays out on the left, with Lacazette potentially leaving, could we see big man Eddie having the striker spot to himself? But even if he does, it's still not guaranteed you'll actually score goals. But you never know. And at his price, could be a very good option eventually. Finishing the team with a man so deadly, so scary, that with his new mustache, even the kids are running away from him. It's Andy Carroll. Now, he kind of hasn't scored a goal in the league for 2 years, but he's hardly played. But he might potentially play a good amount of the first few games for Newcastle, with Dwight Gale currently injured and Joe Linton not impressing much last season. He is only 5.5 million and selected by 0.4% of players. But you never know, on his day, he can bang in an hat-trick. Alright, probably not anymore, but I didn't really have much to work with here in the forwards, so let me off, alright? But that is the team. Obviously, this is not a team you should go for yourself, but I'm just showing you how many good options that could actually be good that are completely ignored. Now let's talk about player ownership and differentials as a whole. A lot of experienced FPL managers will tell you, ignore ownership. Ignore how much a player is chosen, and only choose the players you truly think are gonna score you the points. And you know what? They are right. You shouldn't choose a player just because they are low owned, but only if you think they can do well. Then why am I even discussing this? It's because, like I said earlier, if you have a player that no one else has, so low owned not even the FPL scouts have heard of their name, and he goes and scores a big boy points, that is potentially a massive, massive gain in not only your points, not only your rank, but also your ego. Imagine having the highest scoring player in a week, and he's only 1% owned out of everybody, and you are one of those 1%. Now that is definitely give me a trophy bragworthy. People do view differentials differently, where if they think that a call is 50-50 between the two players, then if you decide the less owned one, there's a massive upside if it works out, but again, massive downside if it goes completely the other way. I personally think that if you want to do really, really well, like challenging for first, you have to take some of these risks and for them to actually pay off. So not just choosing risks just for the sake of it, but good risky picks, where the winners of FPL usually have made some very good calculated risks all throughout the season, getting some extra points that not many other people have, and that's why they're first. But that doesn't mean you should always play risky with all your picks. I would personally suggest that you have at least one different player in your team, one low owned as the risky player, but then the rest not risky and not differentials. So that if your different pick does bad, then your team can still have a good week. But then if your different pick does good, then your team could potentially do very good. Also, it is a bit more fun having more differential players in. Like last year, when you saw a few people captain Antonio against Norwich, and he goes and scores 4 goals. Over 50 points from one player that hardly anybody else has. But I will also say that if you have a team that's full of really high-owned players, then it is quite hard to improve your overall rank quite a lot all at once. As if your team does well, because most people have them, that probably means that most other managers have also done well. You know, as more people have those players. Meaning you're not likely to rise that much from it. But again, you can take it the other way, and say it could be a very good way to stay higher up at the top. But if you are chilling in like the 2 millionth in the world, then you probably want to try and have some risky players in there to try and climb back into the top. But remember, FPL is dynamic. There is no certain way to win. There is no better way to play. But these are just some extra things you can think about when making decisions. And they could help you, they could not. Just the way it goes sometimes. So quickly, as bullet points, this video broken down. Don't choose risky low-owned players just because they are low-owned. But it is okay to make some risky picks if you really think they can do well. Ownership isn't the be-all and end-all, but it is an additional thing to think of when making decisions and transfers. And ownership doesn't mean the player is a really bad player to choose. But that is it. Thanks for watching, and remember...
Don't be a cheeky scrub. Subscribe to Nathan Bacon right now.